All right. So let's step into policy and pressure where we break down the decisions being made at the top and how they quietly reshape life for everybody. Because whether it's happening in the courtroom or across the globe, power is always in motion. I'm looking at two major stories, one impacting the right to vote and the other shaping America's role on the world stage. So here's what happened. Um, we're staying in Louisiana tonight. Louisiana has suspended its upcoming primary election just one day after the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that the state's congressional map is unconstitutional. The reason is lawmakers were found to have allowed race to influence how district lines were drawn. Now, on the surface, this might sound like a technical legal issue, but let's be clear, it's about representation. It's about who gets a voice and who doesn't. So to really understand the weight of this moment, we have to go back to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That was a law born out of the Civil Rights Movement after decades of systematic efforts to block Black Americans from voting. So we're talking about poll taxes, literacy tests, violence, and intimidation. Real people lost their lives, like George Lee and Lamar Smith, for simply trying to help others register to vote. And then came a moment the world couldn't ignore: the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where peaceful protesters were brutally attacked on national television. That moment shocked the country and pushed President Johnson to act, signing the Voting Rights Act into law in 1965, and it worked immediately. Within months, over 250,000 Black Americans were registered to vote in states that had previously blocked them. Over time, though, those protections have been chipped away. One of the biggest turning points came with Shelby County versus Holder in 2013. Their ruling removed a key safeguard, which required certain states to get federal approval before changing voting laws. So now the latest decision adds another layer, because while the court says race can't be used improperly in drawing districts, critics argue that weakening protections could make it harder to ensure fair representation in the first place. So I got a couple of videos for this. Let me do this. First, we're going to look at the history. Hold on. Let's see. Share this tab instead. Add this to the stage. We're going to make it bigger, and then we're going to play it.
Louisiana suspended its primary election that was about to start on Saturday, just one day after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on the Voting Rights Act.
So this ruling states that Louisiana's current congressional map is unconstitutional. They say lawmakers allowed race to play a part in their decision-making.
And we're going to talk about the potential impact we could see here in Illinois and Indiana. But first, we want to go to Marion Brooks. She's here to explain the significance of the Voting Rights Act. Marion.
It was really landmark legislation back in 1965. It grew out of the civil rights movement. But the fight for the right to vote goes back to the post-Reconstruction era, right after the Civil War. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and even outright violence was used to stop African Americans from voting. In fact, in 1955, for example, two men in Mississippi, George Lee, the first man you saw there, and Lamar Smith, were killed for trying to register Black people to vote. And we still commemorate those people who marched from Selma to Montgomery, crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge and being attacked by police, all for the right to vote. Now, that march and the subsequent violence in 1965 played out on folks' televisions. People were horrified. The response led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which was signed by Lyndon Johnson on August 6th. Now, the Voting Rights Act is widely viewed as very successful. The very same year it was enacted, in just a matter of months, you guys, it was enacted in August. By the end of the year, 250,000 African Americans had been registered to vote in states that had restrictive measures. So it worked immediately. The Voting Rights Act was also extended or amended 5 times, signed by both Republican and Democratic presidents. It had bipartisan support, but the Supreme Court, in some of its decisions that started about 16 years ago, began to weaken the Voting Rights Act, specifically beginning kind of in 2013, Shelby County versus Holder. That ruling took down the pre-clearance provision. That portion of the law required certain states to clear any of their voting changes with the Department of Justice. Most of those states had previous histories of discrimination in voting. And that was kind of just the first one, and the one that happened today was another. So we've seen quite a few cases that have sort of stripped some of the power from the Voting Rights Act of 65.
Important to know the history and how far we've come and what happened now.
Context of how that all started and where it came from.
Yeah. So what video is this? Let's play this video.
U.S. Supreme Court dealt a blow to the landmark Voting Rights Act on Wednesday after knocking out a major pillar of the law that had protected against racial discrimination in voting and representation. In the 6 decades since it was signed, the Voting Rights Act became one of the most consequential laws in the nation's history, preventing discrimination against minorities at the ballot box. It also helped elect Black and Hispanic representatives at all levels of government. But on Wednesday, the Supreme Court hollowed out the landmark civil rights era law by striking down a majority Black congressional district in Louisiana. That ruling could provide an open door for political mapmakers to undermine minority representation. The Voting Rights Act was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson on August 6, 1965, 5 months after the Bloody Sunday attack on civil rights marchers in Selma, Alabama, gave momentum to the bill.
Wherever there is discrimination, this law will strike down all restrictions used to deny the people the right to vote.
In recent years, AP reporter Gary Fields sat down with some of the people who were pivotal to the birth of the act.
After having talked to these individuals and to a number of other people about why voting rights was so important, the reason for why they were so important then hasn't changed now. In a democracy or a republic such as ourselves, the vote is the thing that you have that is the coin of the realm that allows you to say, I'm a full participant in this society, in this endeavor that we call the United States of America.
The question now is, what comes next for minority representatives and the communities they represent?
Right. So now this doesn't just stop with Louisiana, y'all. All the way in Illinois and Indiana and all across the country, decision like this can influence how maps are drawn. I want to ask y'all, though, the people that are here, do rulings like this make the system more fair, or do they risk silencing communities over time? So I do have a few comments in the chat. Let's see. Into Deep, I think that was from my last segment. He said it's rolling up downhill. And International Sco said that was Derek Grove's girlfriend, right? I don't know, Sco. I'm not for certain. Vaughn Type Flight, welcome back. You was at my show on Thursday. Welcome back. I do this on Sundays. I'm glad you're here. Miles said they are trying to turn the clock back to Jim Crow. Voting rights is the first step. Miles.